Jake was a curious kid who loved exploring the depths of the internet. He had heard about the dark web, a place where he could find all kinds of mysterious and intriguing things that weren't available on the regular web. Despite warnings from his parents and friends, Jake decided to venture into the dark web to satisfy his curiosity. He spent hours browsing through the dark web, fascinated by the illicit goods and services that were available for purchase. As the night wore on, Jake became increasingly absorbed in his exploration of the dark web, completely unaware of the time passing by. Suddenly, his computer screen flickered and a message popped up. It was from an unknown sender, asking him to call a number that had just appeared on his screen. Without thinking, Jake dialed the number, and a voice answered on the other end. The voice was distorted and eerie, sending shivers down Jake's spine. The voice asked him if he was enjoying his time on the dark web, and Jake, feeling uneasy, replied in the affirmative. The voice then told him to close his eyes and imagine himself in a dark, abandoned alley. Jake did as he was told, and suddenly he found himself in the alley, surrounded by darkness. He heard strange noises and whispers all around him, and his heart started racing with fear. He tried to open his eyes, but he couldn't. The voice on the other end of the phone continued to guide him through the alley, telling him to keep walking and not to look back. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the voice told Jake to open his eyes. When he did, he found himself back in his bedroom, his computer screen still glowing in the darkness. He looked around, his heart pounding, and saw that his room was filled with shadowy figures, whispering and moving in the corners. Jake tried to scream, but he couldn't make a sound. The figures seemed to be closing in on him, and he felt a cold, icy grip on his shoulder. Suddenly, the figures disappeared, and Jake was left alone in his room, sweating and shaking with fear. He never visited the dark web again after that terrifying experience, and he warned all his friends and family never to venture into the dark corners of the internet. From that day on, he was always looking over his shoulder, afraid of what might be lurking in the darkness. As the days went on, Jake couldn't shake off the feeling that something was watching him. He was constantly looking over his shoulder and checking behind him, but he never found anything out of the ordinary. Despite this, he continued to have nightmares about the dark alley and the shadowy figures in his room. One night, as Jake was lying in bed, he heard a faint tapping sound coming from his window. He got up to investigate, but he saw nothing there. As he turned to go back to bed, his phone rang, and he saw that the call was coming from an unknown number. Hesitantly, Jake answered the phone, and he was greeted by the same eerie voice from his previous encounter on the dark web. The voice told him that it had been watching him and that it knew everything about him. Jake's heart raced as the voice continued to taunt him, telling him that he could never escape from the darkness. Jake hung up the phone, but he couldn't shake off the feeling that he was being watched. He tried to distract himself by watching TV, but every time he looked away from the screen, he saw shadows moving around him. The darkness seemed to be closing in on him, and he felt like he was suffocating. In a moment of desperation, Jake turned on all the lights in his house, hoping to banish the darkness. As he walked through his brightly lit home, he felt a sense of relief, but it was short-lived. Suddenly, all the lights went out, leaving him in complete darkness. He heard the tapping sound again, But this time it was louder and more persistent. Jake turned on his phone's flashlight and shone it around the room. To his horror, he saw the shadowy figures from his nightmare standing all around him. They seemed to be beckoning him, calling him into the darkness. In a panic, Jake ran to his front door, but it wouldn't budge. He was trapped in his own house, with no way out. He looked back at the shadowy figures, and he could see their glowing eyes staring back at him. He knew that he was trapped in the darkness, with no hope of escape, and so Jake became another victim of the dark web, lost in the shadows forever. His parents never saw him again, and his friends could only speculate about what had happened to him. But deep down, they knew that he had been consumed by the darkness, never to return. In the end, Jake's tragic fate serves as a warning about the dangers of the dark web. The internet can be a powerful tool, but it can also be a dangerous one, especially when used irresponsibly or for illegal purposes. It's important to remember that the dark web is not a place for the faint of heart or the curious, and that exploring it can lead to serious consequences. Not only is it illegal to purchase illegal goods and services on the dark web, but it's also incredibly dangerous, as the anonymity of the web can make it easy for criminals to take advantage of unsuspecting victims. As with anything on the internet, it's important to exercise caution and good judgment when browsing the web. Always make sure to stay within legal and ethical boundaries, and be wary of anything that seems too good to be true or that makes you feel uncomfortable. Ultimately, the dark web is a reminder that there are dangers lurking in the shadows of the internet, and that it's up to us to protect ourselves from them. By staying informed, staying vigilant, and using the web responsibly, we can help to keep ourselves and others safe in the digital age.